Hello and welcome to another episode of Bio Lessons to Go. Today we'll be exploring disease transmission and defense. Between 1345 and 1350, approximately 25 million people, about 1 out of every 4 individuals in Europe, died from a disease called the plague. Now, many people at this time believed that the plague was the result of foul-smelling air. And so some of the potential treatments included burning pleasant-smelling incense, which we know would not be very effective today against a bacteria that was carried by the fleas on rats. Today, scientists know more about pathogens, or disease-causing organisms. Pathogens include bacteria, protozoans, fungi, worms, and viruses. Now, in order to understand how to control a disease, it's really important to know how it's transmitted. There are multiple ways that a disease can be transmitted. Airborne pathogens can be inhaled. For example, pneumonia is an airborne pathogen. Some could be transmitted by physical contact. Someone, sneezes into their hand and they touch you as they shake your hand, and then you touch your face or put something in your mouth, and so you're going to encounter that pathogen. Another one could be from contaminated food or water, like botulism. Some are sexually transmitted diseases, like HIV. And others, an animal acts as a carrier, a vector to transmit the disease, like malaria. Now, your body has 3 lines of defense from invading pathogens. The first line of defense is the physical and chemical barriers that are set up to prevent pathogens from entering the body. These barriers are called non-specific defenses, meaning that they don't distinguish between one invader or another. They're just designed to block out all potential invaders. An example would be like your skin. Your skin is thick, it's keratinized tissue, makes it hard for things to penetrate. Also, it's constantly dying and being sloughed off. And so anything that attaches might get lost with dead skin. Your saliva and tears contain chemicals called lysozymes, which are antibacterial agents. Your mucous membranes of your respiratory and digestive system act as a sticky barrier. If you were to inhale a pathogen and it gets stuck in that mucus, you have little hair-like structures called cilia, which then allow for it to be pushed up and then swallowed down into your stomach, where you have that very low pH, and your stomach acid is great at destroying those pathogens as well as other potential pathogens that you might encounter through your food or water. The second line of defense is going to be also a non-specific form of defense. Sometimes things do get through, and so we need to be able to attack them. The second line of defense includes white blood cells, your inflammatory response, and specialized proteins. So in terms of your white blood cells, there are several that are non-specialized. These include our macrophages and our neutrophils. Both of these essentially move around in our bloodstream, attacking those invaders, recognizing them as being foreign, but as a non-specific type. It's just attacking all foreign invaders, and they eat them by phagocytosis. Another type of white blood cell is called a natural killer cell, and rather than attacking the invader cells, the natural killer cells will attack our host cells that have actually been infected, and then kill them by poking little holes in their surface membranes, and then they basically leak all their fluids and die. So those are our neutrophils and our macrophages. Another second line of defense is inflammation. At the site of an invasion, like an insect bite or, say, for instance, a needle prick where some bacteria might come in, there are special cells called mast cells, and they release a chemical alarm called a histamine. And what that does is that causes nearby blood vessels to expand uh, or dilate. That way we get more blood flow. And with that blood flow comes white blood cells and more blood. And oftentimes how you know you have an inflammation response is that it's red, it's kind of warm, you get a little bit of swelling. The reason why we have this is to try to remove the pathogens, have that excess blood, remove the pathogens, and pick up those extra broken tissues and move them away. Our final special second line of defense is sometimes we have special proteins that will either attack the invaders directly or block their reproduction. A great example of this is interferon. When a pathogen infects a cell, like a virus, it's going to stimulate the production of interferon. Now, while the host cell may die, the interferon that it's going to produce is going to trigger healthy cells to produce special antiviral proteins that will prevent the virus from reproducing. And so that actually stops additional viral reproduction. Now, our bodies are only able to produce a certain amount of interferon, but fortunately, as a result of recombinant DNA technologies, we've been able to isolate the DNA for the production of interferons and use bacteria to produce human interferon that then we can use as a medicine to also assist in reducing the viral reproduction and help people recover more quickly from illness. Now, lastly, our third line of defense is the targeted response. These are specific defense systems. So they're going to recognize specific cells, specific abnormal cells like cancer cells, or be able to attack certain chemicals. Now, to generate this kind of response takes a little bit longer, but the cool thing is that the overall effect is going to last longer because those specific cells might remain in our bodies and allow us to have continual protection or immunity from those pathogens. In order to recognize specific invaders, you have to have a way for that to take place. So, on the surfaces of viruses, bacteria, fungi, cancer cells, pollen, there's going to be special proteins called antigens. Now, that antigen can then be recognized by an antibody found on the surfaces of white blood cells, or actually floating around in the plasma. And what they do is they act almost like a lock and key, and they're able to match up with the specific binding site on our antigen so that we can mount the appropriate attack. The antibody will tag the invader by binding to that molecule, and that will trigger the certain mechanisms that will allow us to destroy that invader. For example, lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are special white blood cells that have those antibodies on the surface, and so they're able to attach to those invaders and attack them. There are two big types of lymphocytes. We have our B cells, which are born from the bone marrow and continue to develop there. And then we have our T cells, or T lymphocytes, which are born from the bone marrow but then go to the thymus gland where they're going to mature. And then eventually both of these types of cells will move throughout the blood and through the lymphatic system. Now, each one has a different function. The B cells are really important in what we call humoral immunity, while the T cells are important in cell-mediated immunity. The B cells, they attack bacteria and viruses that are in our body fluids. Now, back in the day, we used to call body fluids the humors, and so that's why the B cells are responsible for humoral immunity, the immunity attacking those things that are in our body fluids outside of living cells. What happens when fighting a pathogen, a B cell is going to match up. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different B cells, but only one of them is going to be able to match with that specific pathogen's antigen. What happens at that point is that those B cells become activated. And what that means is that they start to reproduce. And by reproduction, they're going to basically be producing clones of each other. These cloned B cells will develop into plasma cells. The plasma cells are then able to produce specific antibodies, which then are be able to bind to our antigens and then basically have them tagged for destruction from our lymphocytes and our phagocytes and our neutrophils. Now the T cells, they work by directly attacking the body cells that are infected. So since they're attacking other cells, we call their type of immunity cell-mediated immunity. When fighting a pathogen, the T cells, which match up with the particular antigen, will bind to the pathogen's antigen and activate. The activated T cells will grow and develop and turn into cytotoxic T cells, which are then able to actually physically attack those infected cells by once again poking holes in the surface membrane by producing a protein called perforin. If you think about the term perforate, means to poke holes. And then these infected cells are going to leak fluids and they'll break open and die. Now both our cell-mediated T cell immunity as well as our B cells and their humoral immunity, they're going to be helped out sometimes with another kind of T cell, which is called a helper T cell. What the helper T cell does is it recognizes macrophages that have been eating some of the invading pathogen, and when the macrophage is eating those pathogens, it produces on their surface antigens that says, hey, I've been attacking a particular pathogen, so be on the lookout for this pathogen. Well, the T cell, he's able to take that message and recognize, oh, this macrophage has been eating and attacking a pathogen, and send a chemical alarm to the T cells and B cells to mature and begin and to be on the lookout, and so that they'll be able to start hopefully attacking that particular pathogen. So basically our full immune response has two different levels. The primary immune response is the first time that we encounter the pathogen, and then the secondary immune response is the second time we encounter the pathogen. The first time we encounter the pathogen, it's going to take a while for our cells to eventually recognize that invader, build the appropriate B cells and T cells, and then kill that particular organism. Fortunately, some of those B cells and T cells, they stay in our body, and we call these long-lasting lymphocytes the memory cells, because they have that genetic memory of that particular pathogen. And so the second time that we get exposed, we already have those B cells and T cells, so we can very quickly respond, producing tons of those bad boys, allowing for a much faster recovery. So understanding pathogens and how they work allow for us not only to understand how our body responds, but to help us to find ways to augment our own immunity so that we can avoid things like the plague, which killed 1 in 4 of every European in the future.